Hey, what's up, folks? I'm International Master Kostya Kavutskiy here with the recap for the 2020 U.S. Senior Championship. So this is the third in the U.S. Championship series taking place this month, with the U.S. Girls Junior and the U.S. Junior already taking place. Check out my recaps to those tournaments on this channel if you haven't seen them already. And yeah, the U.S. Senior was next in line with 10 players, a lot of former U.S. champions. I think there was something like a total of 13 or 14 U.S. championships won between some of the participants. And yeah, tournament just filled with legends, some really interesting chess. Of course, there was a lot of mistakes, a lot of blunders, given that it was both rapid and online. A lot of these players were saying that they're not used to playing online, and led to all kinds of issues for them. But I thought there was actually a ton of really interesting and high level quality chess in the event, especially some really good endgame technique that we'll see in this video. The winner, as you probably know, is Grandmaster Joel Benjamin, who actually became the first player in US chess history to have won the US Junior Championship way back when, the US Championship. I believe he's a three-time winner, and now the US Senior Championship, so the trifecta. So let me show you guys some of the highlights from this event. The first one comes from round one. Here we have Grigory Kaidanov playing against Patrick Wolf, who actually hasn't played chess tournaments in a long time, but was able to play mainly because the tournament was online and could be completed in 3 days and not a huge time commitment. But here Kaidanov unleashed, I thought, a really nice idea, starting with the move knight to f5, sacrificing the piece. Now, the immediate point is that if g takes f5, this is what happened in the game. White will take on g7 and come in with the queen to g5 check. Had black taken on c3 first, then white can throw in knight takes e7 check, for example, and completely open up black's king as well. This would have been really dangerous for black. So black decided to take on f5, bishop takes g7, king takes g7, queen g5 check, king f8, queen h6 check, king g8. White repeats moves once, always repeat, as they say, although we'll see some players got in trouble doing that in some of these games. Kaidanov repeats again, and here he ends up continuing the attack and sacrificing another piece with knight takes d6. A really nice idea. After e takes d6, rook takes d6. His rook joins the attack. Now he has ideas like queen g5 check and bringing the rook in. Now, objectively, white doesn't have more than a draw here if black defends properly, but that's very difficult to do when your king is under attack. So Stockfish points out some ways black could have held here, like queen e2 check, rook f2, and queen e1. And yeah, apparently white doesn't have more than a draw here. Black can create some serious counterplay with moves like knight d3 next. This was definitely a tough one to find, and Wolf ends up sacrificing the queen, giving up the queen on d6 in order to get this kind of position with queen versus rook in two pieces. But the issue is that Kaidanov here just gets a lot of pawns, especially after this move e takes f5, hitting the knight. It makes it very difficult for black. I believe the losing mistake came in this position when black ended up playing knight f8. The computer finds some way to hold with like rook d5, queen f6, knight g7, g4, and yeah, it's a complete mess. I think white has really good practical chances here though, and yeah, in the game after knight f8, it was already losing after queen e3 and queen h6. White ended up picking up this pawn, activating the rook, and just using the kingside pawns to advance forward. I'll just play through a few more moves here. White took this one, rook e2 check, king f1. And Kaidanov's technique was really good. He pushes f4, goes queen f3, and then at this point, he just takes on e3. Just gives up the queen for the rook and knight, going into this endgame where he has 4 pawns versus the knight. Just way too many pawns for black to deal with, and in addition, white's active king really just kind of seals the deal, and this was basically a losing endgame for black. Now, Wolf actually came back a couple rounds later. This is his game against Grandmaster Dmitry Gurevich, which I think Wolf played really well. In this position, he's already built up an impressive attack on the king side, and with his rook hanging on a5, mind you, a pretty important detail, he goes ahead and just plays g4. which is kind of an obvious attacking move, but black, it was very important to see that after takes, queen takes a5, queen takes h3 check, king to g1, black plays this really important move, bishop to e5. Because the immediate f3 looks quite obvious, but would be met with knight f4, and things are not so clear here. But by starting with this quiet move, bishop e5, now white just has no defense. He can try d4, but then he's going to get hit with f3, and black is just mating very, very soon. So really strong move here, bishop e5, just sealing off white's pieces from being able to defend. White tried f3, g3, and rook f2 as kind of the only way to stave off the attack and give up the rook. But now black wins back the rook, throws in very smart queen h4 check to keep the king from escaping. And now after king h7, white's king was just getting mated here. Now, amazingly, white actually missed a chance right at the end of this game to save it. I don't think it quite spoils the win. I feel like it was a really, really nice combination by black, but I do want to show it here. After rook takes g1, knight takes g1. Here, had black found this move queen to g2, the game would have just been over. He's hitting the knight. White has no good way of defending the knight. And if the knight moves, then black is just taking the pawn on f3 and position collapses. But in the game, black played this move queen h1. And after queen b6, c5, white resigned because on king f1, bishop d4, black is just winning the piece and it's game over. But in fact, had white played king f1 in this position, apparently black is no longer winning here, might not even be better, as the move bishop d4, this would run into queen f5 check or even queen g5, where white is actually holding and the knight is kind of defending everything here. Well, basically white is getting enough counterplay with the queen on the 5th rank. So that was actually kind of an unfortunate miss. Gurevich could have found this and possibly held the game. But as it happened, queen b6 was played. Of course, the players were in probably super heavy time trouble, c5, and that was that. The next highlight I want to show before we talk about Benjamin's performance comes from one of the later games between Shabalov and Golden. This is a pretty tight game, very much back and forth. And here black makes kind of a surprising blunder with the move knight to b4. This might be a good tactics exercise if you guys want to pause your video and try to figure out how white should refute this move. But at first glance, it looks like a very strong move, opening up the bishop against white's queen, potentially looking at the d3 square for the knight. White's queen also has to keep in touch with the knight on f5. My guess is black maybe expected something like queen to g3 here, where he could play queen takes f5, a takes b4, and something like c takes b4, where basically the position is close to equal. Both sides are kind of okay here. But instead, Shabalov finds the really, really strong retort h4, such a powerful counterattack. Now, the first point here is that if black takes the queen on f3, white will of course take the queen on g5, and in the resulting position, not only is the bishop and the knight hanging, but white also now has the threat of knight e7 check in the position. So black is just losing material here any way they play. For instance, knight d3, white can already just take the bishop. And then on knight c1, we can take back. On knight takes b2, we can go knight e7 check, and we pick up the rook, and white will have at least an extra exchange in the final position, might even be able to trap the knight at the end of the line and win even more material. So that was kind of the first point of h4, but the second point is that if black tries to move the queen away, there's actually a problem with every single move. For instance, queen g6, this one runs into knight e7 check, and black loses the queen with check, so no time to even take on f3. And if black plays a move like queen to d8, well, white's queen is still under attack, but white can get out of the way with tempo by playing queen g3 or queen g4, threatening checkmate. Black has to defend against this one, and then white can take the knight next move, among other things. On g6, I'm sure knight h6 check and e6 are both very, very strong moves as well. So yeah, really nice shot h4 that basically just won the game on the spot for white. I found this really surprising and very cool move. The game finished queen d2, queen to g3, and for the same reasons as before, black is just losing material here. Would have to play a move like g6 if you wanted to defend against mates, And now since the bishop on b2 is hanging, white can play something like bishop c3 here, hit the queen, and then think about taking here next, or going knight e7 check, or knight h6 check, or e6 again, a million moves, and white is kind of winning all over the place. But yeah, really nice tactical display there by Shaba. So let's talk about Joel Benjamin's games. I felt like Joel played in a really strong and technical style for most of the event. He won a lot of endgames, converted a lot of slightly better positions, and in the post-tournament interview, he felt like he got a little bit lucky in some of his games. That certainly happened, but from what I saw, I think his technique was just really, really good, and he basically made fewer mistakes than everyone else. His first win that I thought was quite impressive was this game against Patrick Wolf. In this position, black was a little bit worse here and offered a queen trade with queen to c6. Objectively, I think this was a reasonable decision as black is supposedly drawing the endgame, but as Joel kind of shows here, he does have a pretty superior knight versus bishop endgame, as his knight just has this beautiful square on c4. He can support the knight with b3. The knight is basically untouchable, and white can put all of his pawns on light squares to play against black's dark squared bishop. Now, objectively, I think black could have held this one, but it was not easy, and especially in a rapid time control, it's often much more convenient to play with the knight because you can bounce around. The knight is very tricky. It's very easy to blunder a knight fork, and it's pretty simple to play against the bishop. You just don't let the bishop attack anything. So once again, black did have chances to hold here, but white just continues to make progress. Actually, an interesting detail here was that already white could have played the move b5, trading his b pawn for black's c pawn, but getting his king very, very active to a6, and as well as preparing to bring the knight either to c6 or c4. I think this one would have been really, really close to a win for white. Instead, Benjamin goes for king b3, a little bit slower, king a4, and Wolf ends up making a critical mistake here after a4, bishop f2, and b5. Apparently, Stockfish can still hold this one after takes, and g5. And there's, I guess the main point is that when white plays knight a5 and goes for the a pawn with knight to c6, this is exactly the moment where black needs to basically ditch the queen side and start running towards the king side. So something like king c5, knight takes a7, king c4, with the very deep point that if white pushes forward, black in this position would be ready to sacrifice the bishop and start running towards white's king side. I analyzed this position a little bit. I think it's a draw with best play. I'm not even sure. I think it's still black who has to be precise here to actually make a draw, but it's not too hard when your king is just running towards your opponent's pawns. Anyway, this is, what I would consider kind of like a miracle defense. Usually what happens is players make mistakes and end up going down. Here black played bishop d4. Knight a5, and already white is winning this one. Black tries to hold on to the a pawn, but after knight c6 check and king to a8, Benjamin found a really nice way to break through and win the game here. Once again, if you guys want to treat this as an exercise, feel free to pause the video and think about it for a couple minutes. And well, here white played the really nice shot, knight takes a7. I thought this was very, very nice and efficient way of winning the endgame. The point is, after bishop takes a7, b6, the bishop cannot move back to b8 because white has b7 checkmate. Really, really cute mate on the board. And otherwise, black is losing the piece. So if bishop takes b6, king takes b6, in the resulting king and pawn endgame, white's king is just obviously much stronger and is going to win on the king side. And perhaps more importantly, after a move like f5, which happened in the game, b takes a7, it feels like black might have some chances because of the possible stalemate, but there's too many pawns left on the king side, and black is just not in time. So black decided to resign here because after any move they try, like f4 for example, white will simply release black's king from the stalemate. Can even do it. Next move can play king b6, g5, and king c5 like this. And once black's king is released from the stalemate, of course, we just get that same king and pawn endgame from before, and white is just cruising to victory here. Or in case of fe, g5, once again, white even has a tempo to spare, but can already play king b5 here and just go after the king side. And yeah, black has no chance of saving this one. So I felt like this was a really nice game. It wasn't like perfect technique because white wasn't exactly winning from the outset, but he posed problems and made it really difficult for black to hold, and eventually capitalized on his opponent's mistakes. Now, Joel, I would say, got pretty lucky in his game against Yermolinsky. He was actually he got totally outplayed out of the opening, and he was much worse with white right out of the gate. But he fought on, and he managed to get into an endgame where he was worse with the knight versus bishop. Oddly enough, these two games were back-to-back, so he had two back-to-back wins with the knight versus the bishop. And yeah, I basically made it hard for Yermo, who wasn't able to find the best way of capitalizing on his advantage. We got to this point in the endgame where black ends up making this very, very double-edged move e3, and this actually ends up costing Yermo the game. It felt actually like a really interesting move. The point is that now, of course, white is going to have to deal with the pawn. The immediate king d3 is, of course, a blunder after bishop takes d4, and white would be unable to catch up to the pawn. So instead, Benjamin goes knight f3. Black plays e2, threatening bishop f2, winning the knight, so white is forced to play king to d3. And essentially, this is a pawn sacrifice, as now black plays king to d5, with the idea that if white takes on e2, black would play king c4 and go after white's queen side. So a very, very ambitious idea. For example, white could take on h4 here and possibly even take on g6. Not sure exactly what black would have in mind here. Maybe he can even throw in g5, g4, or maybe he can just think about playing this endgame out where the bishop is for sure going to be stronger than white's knight. But ultimately, the idea just doesn't hold and doesn't hold up, and Benjamin was able to kind of refute it with good technique. Now, king takes e2, for the record, was winning after king c4. White would have to find the really precise check, knight e5. The point here is that black can't take on b4 in view of knight c6 check. We end up getting a similar endgame to this in the actual game, and it turns out to be winning for white. Just for instance, after a5 here, for example, white can already play knight c6, take the pawn on a5, and again run to the king side. We see this theme again with Benjamin here using the more active king in the king and pawn endgame. And since black can't take this pawn on b4, black would have to play something like king to b3, and then white can play knight c6, for example, and then either a5 or b5. Stockfish says white is winning here. I'm sure it would be a difficult endgame to play in time trouble. But Benjamin's way is actually perhaps even cleaner. He decides to push b5 here, which I thought was really interesting. Now if black trades the pawn on b5, black can certainly pick this one off, but white will take on e2, black will take on b5, and of course in the resulting endgame, white is not only snagging this pawn, but is easily going to be able to win this pawn as well. Yeah, basically with the more active king and extra pawns on the king side, probably should be winning for white. He can also consider a move like knight e5 and then bringing the king in this way just to make sure that he wins both pawns and leaves himself with connected passers at the end. So black couldn't really go for this. This would basically be like white having an outside pass pawn and winning. Instead, Yermo plays a5, leaving white with a protected passer, but with the intent of going after the a-pawn here, but it simply doesn't work out after knight e5 check, king to b3, and very precise move here by white, knight d7. Really, really strong, threatening b6 and just winning black's bishop. Black had to take on a4, b6, white ends up winning the piece, and this was not the easiest endgame to play for sure, but it did end up winning for white with precise play. After king c4, white repeated here. Now, this was actually a mistake according to the engines. I think Stockfish was saying king c5, knight d7 check, king d6, and black is actually making a draw by some miracle. That was tough one to see. I think most players, especially the guys that were trained classic Soviet style. You know, they're always taught to repeat moves. This might have been a moment where repeating moves was not good. Anyway, Yermo does go back. King b5, white plays knight d5, king c4, and now Benjamin finds the only winning move in the position, knight to f4. Getting ready to snag the g6 pawn and then come back in time to deal with black's a pawn. So black played king to c3 here. Had he just started pushing the pawn, white would then use his king to stop the pawn. And the point here is that white's king is going to be blocking the pawn, and the knight is just easily picking up black's king side. So if white is able to stop the a pawn, basically it's game over. Black won't be able to do anything about it, and we'll lose the game. So Yermo tried king to c3 in order to keep white's king shouldered off, but king d1, king b2. White has time now to take on g6, and the knight gets back literally just in time, as now in case of a3, white would have knight c4 check, followed by taking the pawn and again running the king to the king side. So because of this check, black had to go king to b3, but now white is able to bring his king in and stop black's a pawn, and with white's knight getting ready to just snag the h4 pawn, the game is just completely lost, and black resigned. So a bit of a lucky win, but still Benjamin had to find some really precise moves in this endgame to actually find the full point. Now, going into the last two rounds, Benjamin was a half a point ahead of his nearest rival, Grandmaster Igor Novikov, who's having a pretty solid event. And actually, Yermolinsky does Benjamin another big favor here, gives him another gift by defeating Novikov, and I think inflicting the only loss that Novikov had in the event, if I remember correctly. So Yermo kind of ends up playing spoiler here. He wins this game while Benjamin draws. This gives Benjamin a full point lead going into the final round. And then Benjamin just needed a draw in the last round, although he ended up winning his game to clinch the title. But Yermo actually showed really fantastic technique himself here, playing against the IQP. Really want to show this game just because it's very instructive. He starts with the move rook fc1, indicating that he wants to trade rooks. Black decides to do it for him. Rook takes c1, rook to c8. He trades on c8, bishop takes c8, and queen c3, immediately grabbing the only open file with the queen. Black plays bishop d7, and now he just starts improving his position. a5, b4, black is improving as well, bringing in the king now that it's relatively safe. And here comes more improvements, knight b3. So the knight is heading to c5, and the queen gets to use the d4 square. Here black plays bishop e6. I think the engines were pointing out this is a mistake, saying that the bishop was probably a better defender on c6. But in any case, bishop e6, knight c5 is played, queen d4, king f8. And now white starts bringing in the king. I want to mention another move that is possible in these types of positions is g4, just trying to start advancing with h4, g5, and taking more space. This can also be quite strong. But Yermo just starts bringing in the king to e1, and black decides to finally try to trade off this knight on c5. Without having anything else to do, it's certainly understandable. But white is unfazed, king d2, and not only does he allow a trade of knights, he actually forces a queen trade going into bishops of same color endgame, where only white can really be better here, as this d5 pawn is just going to be a chronic weakness for the rest of the game. Now, I think black definitely could have defended a little bit better here, but overall it's a very tough endgame, and I believe it's basically lost for black with best play. King b4 is played here, setting up bishop a4 check to push black's king back. So king c7, bishop a4, bishop to d7. Now this is a pretty clever move by black. If white trades bishops here after king takes d7, white is not winning this king and pawn endgame. Like, he could try king c3, king c6, and king to d4, but I think black is holding this one with a move like h5. And essentially white doesn't have enough tempos to run black out of moves, not to mention black always has this move king to b5 if they need, and can go after the a5 pawn. So I think objectively this one is probably a draw. So Yermo keeps the bishops on the board, king to c6, plays f4, now black plays g5, and very instructive moment here in meeting this move g5. White takes on g5, hg, and now goes back bishop a4 check, because now the situation has changed. King to c7, takes on d7, king takes, king c3, and the point here is that after king to c6, king to d4, now with these moves included, fg5, hg5, white has the potential to make an outside pass pawn, and this is just the strongest potential pass pawn in the position, and black is just dead lost. He can try king b5, but he's way behind. g3 takes, h4, let's say take, king to b4, white starts pushing, and white is going to be promoting first in this one. Okay, white basically wins by one tempo, but one tempo is one too many, and that's it. So in view of this, black basically resigned. Of course, white can maybe even play other moves here like king c3 to slow down black, and then just promote his pawn. In fact, that might be a much simpler way of winning the game here for white, as black's king is not going to be able to stop the pawn. But in any case, really fantastic technique. Had black not played this move g5, it still would have been a very difficult endgame. At some point, the king would have to go back to c7. White would bring his king to d4, put the bishop either on f3 or on b3, and ultimately it would be very difficult for black to hold this one. This was just a very unpleasant endgame right from the start. So Yermolinsky wins that one, which means that Benjamin in the final round just needed a draw against the 10th seed FIDE Master Shelby gets here. Shout out to Shelby, who I think really turned some heads in this tournament. I mean, he was, I think, the only player in the field who's not a Grandmaster. You know, he's the 10th seed, at least like 100 points lower than everyone else. He qualified by virtue of winning the US Senior Open, so he earned his spot by qualification. But he really brought it. You know, he was trying to win every game. He played 1a3 in all of his games as white. He played the Shigorin and all these weird, wacky openings as black. And he scored some points. He won some games. So, I think he had a performance to be proud of. But in this game, okay, he gets outplayed by Joel Benjamin, who already actually missed a chance to win in this position with the move bishop takes b2 check. This would have been a winning tactic for black in view of king takes b2, and then either rook to d8, skewering white's queen and rook and just winning the exchange and winning the game. Benjamin misses this one, plays bishop to g7, but is still just much better in the position with better development, and white's pieces still on the back rank here. He actually offers a draw at some point in this game to his opponent just to clinch first place. I think it was a pretty generous draw offer, as black is much better. But to Shelby's credit, he denies it, wants to play for a win. I think he just didn't want his tournament to end, so he just wanted to keep fighting until the very end, which I definitely respect. But after denying the draw offer, of course, black is in full control here, plays this nice move queen to d5, white goes e4, and then the queen comes in with queen to a2, and yeah, now white's king is in huge trouble here. Bishop d3 was played, c4, queen b1, black keeps the queen, drops back queen b6, queen a2, and here comes the winning tactic in the game. Pause your video if you want to try and spot it. Bishop takes c3, really nice shot. The point is b takes c3 would be met with queen e3 check, and white would have to play either king b1 or king b2, rook b6 check. And either white gives back the piece immediately and ends up completely lost anyway, or he goes king a1 and gets mated after queen takes c3. So this was basically over. After bishop takes c3, white tried rook to d1, but queen e3 check, king b1. Black's initiative here is just way too strong. The king on a2 is actually hampering white's king by locking the king in. And after takes, queen d3 check, white is just getting checkmated here by force. If king c1, there's bishop d2 made on the board, or queen d2, queen takes d1 was also good. And after bishop c2, queen f1, bishop d1, queen takes d1. That was the end of the game. Good sportsmanship there to play it out until checkmate, and letting Joel Benjamin, win the US Senior Championship and completing the trifecta on a really nice note. Always nice to put checkmate on the board. Let this serve as a public announcement for you guys. If you're playing an important game and your opponent has won, nice game, and they have some kind of mating combination, just let them play mate on the board. It's so much better. Everyone likes playing mate on the board, you know, and you would appreciate if your opponents did it for you. So I think we should just make that a new sportsmanship custom. Let your opponents checkmate you when they have a forced mating combination on the board. It just, everyone wins. Everyone wins. So yeah, guys, that wraps it up for this recap. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you want to see any of these games, there will be a link to the Lichess study that I'm using in the description below. And up next is going to be the 2020 US Women's Championship, which starts tomorrow with regular coverage on uschesschamps.com. And I'll be back for another recap for that event. It's going to be really exciting. So until then, have a good one. Take care.